Next, I am pleased to introduce the first of our 4 anchor panels, and so I'm delighted that Professor Erin Hester will stay on to moderate this one. It will explore climate mitigation and adaptation strategies through emerging opportunities in agricultural technology, natural resources, and food production. Please welcome back our UC Merced colleague, Professor Erin Hester, who will moderate Ag Food Tech, Feeding 10 Billion in a Hotter World. Erin is Associate Professor of Geomatics and Civil and Environmental Engineering and the Associate Director of CITRIS at UC Merced. Erin, over to you.
Thank you, Camille, and welcome everyone. Thank you for attending our panel today. Agriculture, as the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, presents a crucial solution for climate change mitigation as a potential store for carbon and a way to manage waste energy in our food systems. In this panel, we are going to explore strategies through up and coming questions in agricultural technologies and natural resources and food production with our 3 distinguished panelists. We have Melissa Ho here, Senior Vice President from Freshwater and Food at the World Wildlife Fund. We have Professor Alina Zare in Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of Florida. And we have Ranjeeta Singh, Chief Product Officer at Climate LLC, part of Bayer. They're going to represent to us both industry, NGO, and academic perspectives on ag food tech and climate solutions. I'd like to start with Melissa Ho. Each of our panelists are going to share an introduction of themselves, as well as how they got into ag food tech. Melissa?
Hi, thanks so much, Dr. Hester, and thanks so much to the organizers for the invitation to join a great panel. This is a great topic because there's so much happening in it. It's a really fast-moving, evolving space where agriculture might have once been a backwater. I think it's now at the forefront of everyone jumping in the tech space to help innovate, and we couldn't welcome them more quickly. I think for me, I just wanted my background. When I was 12, I thought I was going to be a lawyer, an attorney, maybe an environmental lawyer, maybe a litigator, defense attorney. I had the pleasure and privilege of going to Cornell for university, and that's where I fell in love with agriculture. They had students and professionals from all over the world that had amazing international ag backgrounds. I quickly moved from a biology major as a freshman and started joining these seminars with these ag professionals from around the world, talking about the green revolution, slash and burn agricultural, structural adjustment. And I quickly realized for me what it was is that agriculture is the intersection of people and place. And that really looking, at least it should be, right? Historically and culturally, food is where people are situated in the world and that their interaction with their environment. But a lot of that has changed now in how we think about agriculture and what we do now at World Wildlife Fund, which is where it comes full circle for me from where I've been on this journey over 30 years in working in agriculture, is really now about agriculture's impact on the planet and people's need for food and agriculture and how do we continue sustaining a planet to keep feeding ourselves. So that's a lot of what the challenges are at WWF that we work on. Agriculture is so critical for human development, and yet it is one of the biggest drivers of degradation of our planet and climate change. And so it's really a huge challenge. And so employing technology and all the tools we can to solve it is such an important challenge. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome. Yes, food is so central to our lives. This is a critical challenge. Next up, Ranjeeta Singh. Ranjeeta, how did you get into ag food tech? And can you tell us a little bit about your journey there?
Absolutely. Thank you, Erin. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Climate LLC, responsible for the product strategy and roadmap plan for Climate Fieldview platform. Climate LLC, which is part of Bayer, aims to help all of the world's farmers sustainably increase their productivity with the help of digital tools. I'm based in the Bay Area. I come from a tech world. I did BS in computer science and engineering from Birla Institute of Technology, Merced in India. came to the US to pursue master's in computer science from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and then later pursued MBA while working at Intel. I've been working in the technology industry for more than 2 decades across companies like Wipro, followed by Intel, where I was there for around 18 years, and then Teradata for almost 3 years prior to joining Climate. The opportunity to leverage technology to make a difference in the lives of farmers is what drove me to Climate. Growing up in India, where 60% of the livelihood comes from agriculture, I felt this was connecting me back to my roots. What I find most exciting about the ag tech or food space is that it touches upon the lives of every single person on the planet. So it's a huge global opportunity. The agriculture industry, like many others, has been driven by technological development and innovation. Growing more crops on less land, using fewer resources is the main focus of this development and innovation. At its core, digital farming is so crucial for sustainability because the digital tools and the data insights they deliver help farmers get the most nutritious food, fuel, and fiber from every acre of land that they use while using fewer resources to optimize their operations.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ranjeeta. And finally, Alina Zare, professor at University of Florida. Alina, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the ag food tech space?
Sure, I will. It's great to be here. Thanks for this opportunity. And just to introduce myself, what I'm doing now is I run the Machine Learning and Sensing Lab at the University of Florida. And we develop machine learning and artificial intelligence solutions for a variety of applications. And a big part of that is ag food tech, right? So how did I get to ag food tech? Let me first talk about how I got into computing. And then I'll have to give a little bit of family history to say that. And then I'll talk about how I transitioned to ag food tech. So bear with me, it won't be long. My parents grew up in an Armenian community in Tehran. And my mom graduated, she was valedictorian in her high school class, and this was in the 70s. And she started a computer science program, and she was learning how to program with punch cards. At the same time, her older sister married an American serviceman stationed in Tehran, and they got married and was moving to the US. And my grandmother, who was a single mom of 4 kids, said, I don't want my family to be split up. And she convinced my mother to leave her program, immigrate to the US. And so she started over. I mean, she couldn't speak the language. She started as a seamstress, eventually became an accountant. And so when I was growing up in the mid 80s, she wanted to instill that love of computing that she still had. She purchased an IBM PC for me, and they paid that off monthly forever. I can't believe I'm getting emotional. And I learned how to program on that, and I got, this love of computing that she passed down to me. And so how did I get into ag food tech? Well, when I started my first faculty position, I was at the University of Missouri, and my lab at the time was overwhelmingly national defense. And we were working on a lot of detection problems, target detection. A big area of that was looking for buried landmines and buried IEDs. And well, I had a colleague at the University of Florida, or Missouri, come up to me and said, well, if you can detect buried landmines, can you detect plant roots? And I said, let's give it a shot. And now, many years later, my lab is overwhelmingly plant science, agriculture, and ecology focused. We still do some work in national defense, but the thing that helped me really shift and motivate that shift is much of the same things that the other panelists have mentioned, the importance of this area and then the impact on everyone in the world. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to circle back around again and ask, why do you believe the future of food is so important about our current conversations in climate change? And can you give us some examples of how your organizations are interacting with ag tech and green tech more broadly to address the future of food? And let's go ahead and start with Ranjeeta.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erin. So there are several mega trends that are shaping our world today and also shaping the ag world. We face a number of challenges. It is expected that we'll need 50% more food and feed to meet the demand of the growing population by the year 2050. There's an increasing demand for animal protein, a trend that is driven by urbanization and also rising incomes. There are limited resources available for agriculture, with 1/3 of all arable land and 75% of freshwater stocks currently devoted to agriculture. Food security, which refers to the reliable access to safe, affordable, and nutritious food, is linked to a predictable climate and healthy ecosystem. Climate change, land loss, and biodiversity reduction are putting increasing pressure on the ecosystems needed to support increased food and feed production. Climate change is rapidly altering the environment. It's not news to any one of us. We all know that. Agriculture is one of the primary producers of greenhouse gases. At Climate LLC, where I work, which is part of BEAR, our belief is that the next major breakthrough will not be through seed technology or chemistry alone. We believe that the greatest value can be delivered to farmers through the integration of hardware, software, and rigorous data science models, all working together to deliver customized insights for farmers. Applications like Climate Field View help farmers with virtually every decision they must make over the course of a growing season. Our new greenhouse gas emission reduction program has digital tools like Field View as the backbone to enable the program. There are multiple levers that we can put pressure on to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions coming from the farmers' fields. These include adoption of carbon smart agriculture practices, such as cover crops and no-till, better management of nitrogen and other fertilizers, improvement in crop genetics, and crop protection products, to name a few.
Very exciting work. Melissa, some people in our audience might be wondering, what is the World Wildlife Fund doing on this panel? And maybe they're not so aware of your work in this space. Can you tell us a little bit about why the future of food is so important to you in our conversations about climate change and how the World Wildlife Fund is interacting with ag tech?
Sure, thanks. Thanks also for framing and inviting us to an unlikely forum. I really want to thank Ranjeeta for setting out a lot of the context that were in my talking points, so I don't need to necessarily repeat all of the places why ag is such a driver of degradation of nature and climate. And obviously we know how climate and the degradation of nature affects our ability to produce food. You know, in addition to temperatures and extreme events, we see loss of pollinators, we see loss of topsoil and soil health. The more we drive expansion of agriculture and drive deforestation or conversion, not only of our tropical forests, but also grasslands and wetlands, we are also setting up ourselves for more zoonotic disease spillover and future global pandemics, right? So a lot of connections to be made on why we do need to feed their future and why we focus on animal proteins, as Ranjeeta had noted. That is really where the source of footprint is and really where a lot of the growth and consumption is happening, for sure. And we need protein for nutrition as well. So that is a lot of where our interests are. Again, it's the meeting what human development needs are with how to have a healthy, thriving planet in the meantime. So that's a lot of the why. We do what we do, why food and freshwater are such big portfolio pieces for WWF, in addition to landscapes and oceans and forests and wildlife. People think of us as the panda, but we care about black and white creatures like cows as well. And I think what we do in this space is interesting in that we do think of ag tech as sensors and digital ledger tools like blockchain. We definitely are working on a range of satellite imagery options with traceability and accountability and landscape level as well as field level. Really watch and look at the innovations in places like Bayer and other companies that are really advancing technologies and tools for precision agriculture, as Ranjeeta noted. But I think some of our innovations are also about systems change, right? A lot of the innovations and modernizing of monocultures is a lot of what has driven us to get into the situation we're at, with overuse of fertilizers, with overuse of water and irrigation. And so some of what we drive in terms of innovation and tech is really even mindset shift and what kind of agriculture we want for the future. So it's not just incremental and continuous improvement and efficiency we're driving, but it's really a different model of agriculture altogether, and thinking of regenerative systems, not just doing less bad, but really thinking about how to restore and regenerate soil, how to think of circularity by design, where you're not just trying to reduce and minimize the 40–50% of food waste and loss we see in the supply chain, but that we really think of waste to feed, waste to energy systems, and how do we minimize and optimize the nutrient flow in the system in general. So there's a lot there. It is technology like breeding, like seeds, like computer and satellite imagery, but it's also about redesigning the systems in general. And that's the sort of innovation we also look at, and including policy and financial systems as well.
So Alina, your tech in your work intersects computer science tech and ag tech, but also these questions of ecosystems and ecosystem services. So why do you think the future of food is so important in our current conversations about climate change? And how are you interacting with ag tech to address the future of food?
Thank you. So as you mentioned, one of the areas that we're really focusing on is trying to understand and measure the ecosystem services that are being provided by food production systems and management practices, right? So, the ecosystem services we're talking about are, of course, a big discussion point is carbon and carbon storage, but also water quality and quantity, how management practices are impacting water, soil health, as has been mentioned, and then things of course, profitability and yield, and the social aspects, jobs, and that all those combinations together. And a lot of the work that has been in this space is often focused much about on one of these factors. For example, how are our management practices impacting water quality? How are they impacting carbon storage? And a lot of the way we're pivoting and starting to think about is these choices are very interconnected, right? So management decisions you make to improve one may have detrimental effects on others. And those complex relationships are not really fully understood, especially if we start going across region and different production systems and different producers. And so this is the area that we're trying to focus on and really understand these complex relationships between different ecosystem services, and then provide, of course, using the sensors to map those relationships and understand the impact of different management practices on ecosystem service production. And then, hopefully our end term goal as a computer science lab is, can we have that digital infrastructure that starts to learn these mappings from sensors on the ground, from satellite to ecosystem services, and leverage what we know about these complex relationships and augment them. So thank you.
So tech can play a transformative role, and we've heard a little bit about our ability to potentially mitigate some climate impacts through things like regenerative farming or decarbonization. There's an urgent need, as we've heard, to adapt to a warmer world and ensure food security, particularly for the world's most vulnerable populations. And there are other important innovations that Melissa alluded to in terms of thinking about like traceability and accountability, but also decision support. So Alina, where do you believe innovation is going to make the most impact in this space? And can we scale? Can we get this to a scale to actually tackle climate change?
Yeah, so this is an excellent question. I think one aspect that innovation is needed, at least on the computer science side, is really blending together sort of the data-driven, machine learning, AI-based approaches with more traditional modeling and knowledge bases. So what do I mean by that? Essentially, when we apply these machine learning and AI techniques towards food and ag tech, such as trying to map impact on ecosystem services, they're entirely data driven, and the search space there is enormous, right? So there's no way, it's infeasible in my mind to collect enough data to train one of these systems to really predict the impact in every possible environmental condition and every weather condition and all these varying factors. But we do have an immense knowledge of how a lot of aspects of these systems work. And so I think in AI and in my area of machine learning, I think one of the big innovations is how do we take all our advancements in data-driven machine learning and AI and blend it really seamlessly, ideally, with traditional knowledge-based systems and traditional modeling. So we can really leverage where we don't have as much data, our historical knowledge and understanding of these systems, and continue to augment that knowledge, and then adapt and also leverage the power of sort of data-driven machine learning methods.
So that's fantastic, Alina. And as someone who thinks about data a lot, I certainly understand the weaknesses. And I think we do need to move forward from there. Melissa, turning to you, you mentioned previously that WWF thinks a lot about leveraging tech to really achieve systems change, right? And in a lot of ways, this is a systems engineering problem. And so can you tell us a little bit about where you see some of the places where innovation is going to make the greatest impact on this problem? And is there a way to get this to scale?
Yeah, and I think, again, my application of technology and ag tech is likely different, and hence why you have a diverse panel but than my colleagues here. So it's so fascinating. I want to follow up with you on the root biology work you do, as well as on the machine learning you do. I think two areas I'll mention briefly. One, I think using tech at global levels, landscape levels, and then now with the precision satellite imagery we have that can go down to field levels and point source pollution levels, is a really powerful tool for accountability. So there are several different orgs out there, but the scope and scale and availability now of data to track and trace, for instance, deforestation happening in all of our tropical forests, or point source methane mapping coming out of a cow, a facility, or energy, or a power plant. And it's over timescales that you can track pulses. It's enough you can make decisions on, or regulate on, or make slap fines on, as well as track commitments that corporates are making for responsible supply chain sourcing of beef or soy out of certain regions. So these kinds of tools will, the trust but verify notion, allow us to have sort of accountability mechanisms. So that's one area I think is super important. I think the other area where I enlisting help of folks way smarter than us who integrate and create more clarity and simplicity out of complexity and modeling and future scenarios planning is around really looking at how to put together climate scenarios, but also surveillance mechanisms of food security, of pandemic, zoonosis surveillance, but then overlaying the human dimensions of where we see governance issues or capacity issues or vulnerabilities, right? And then how do we think of proactively looking at where these kinds of hot water is a huge issue, where these hotspots are, and where we see rocks and stressors in the system. Ukraine right now is a huge one because a third of wheat production in the world is coming out of that region, and what repercussions will that have? So those shocks and stresses can look like many things, but how do we put that on a map? How do we put that in real time, and then medium and longer term trends? And then how do we make sure we have real people, not just the machine learning, and analyzing and understanding what the human implications are for conflict, for suffering, for opportunities for solutions, and then translate that quickly in the spaces we need, global dialogues and that kind of thing, to get solutions before they become crises. So yeah, that's what we need to feed a future population, but all these different things are playing out that are going to upset the balance in our ability to do that. And where and how can we anticipate the change that we need to do, and where we can avoid conflict and stress? How can we start planning ahead for what the future holds? Thanks.
Thank you, Melissa. Those systems are so important, but also those in the field advances matter a lot too, as we think about how to increase productivity and reduce our inputs. Ranjeeta, as Chief Product Officer at Climate LLC, your thumb is on the pulse of where these innovations are happening. So can you tell us where you believe innovation is going to make the most impact in the climate space, and can we get these innovations at scale?
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and just like Melissa and Alina alluded to, right, innovation and AgTech definitely has the potential to address some of the sustainability and productivity challenges which are facing the food production. And as both of them already pointed out, I also believe that the next breakthrough in agriculture is going to be through using data and analytics to optimize the decision making. And by analyzing and correlating information about weather, types of seeds, soil, and other factors, farmers can make really more informed decisions. I truly believe that the future of ag is digital farming, where technology becomes an enabler, but it blends so seamlessly with the workflow of the farmers that you don't even realize it exists. I think that is where we need to get to. And the coming ag revolution, it has to be a green one with science and technology at its heart. So we'll have to look at the demand side as well as the supply side of the food scarcity equation, where we are using technology not just with a focus on innovation, but actually really focusing on addressing the real needs of the consumers and re-engineering the entire value chain. What this entails is really improving communication and links along the whole agriculture supply chain. And this can help foster sustainable food production. So what's going to be very important is partnerships between farmers, producers, scientists, and entrepreneurs around the world so that we can transition to a sustainable food systems. And all these agri-tech companies, including the company where I work, with all the disruptive technologies, we need to scale quickly and also look for opportunities globally so that we can maximize the impact.
So to follow up on that, ag tech is literally booming. You mentioned, the multiple companies that are working in this sector, and the sector itself is experiencing record levels of investment, and the trends seem to be on the rise in terms of capital in this sector. But as Melissa said, our food systems are complex and multinational. And yet we still see this huge digital tech gap in farming systems, but also in our food systems more broadly. So can we close this tech gap in time to keep pace with a growing population and a changing climate? And what will it take? And Ranjeeta will continue with you.
So I think the reality is that we have to quickly and efficiently bring farming from industrial age into the digital one, right? Because the technology will need to fill the gap. And behind the scenes, a radical shift is needed to retool our food systems and make the most that we have for a growing population. There's, of course, no single solution that can tackle the entire food loss and waste. As Melissa already pointed out, it's a multifaceted problem that requires a collective effort from farmers, factories, restaurants, governments, and all the actors of the food chain, all the way to consumers. In my opinion, the AgTech movement won't even reach its full potential unless the focus is on making farmers' lives easier, right? Because we have to look at it from farmers' standpoint, and especially with the proliferation of technologies, because there's so many technologies available to them. We need to provide like a seamless, intuitive interface for them, and how all these technologies blend together to address the real needs of the farmers. In my mind, that is the problem that needs to be urgently addressed. And I also believe that there is a urban-rural divide when it comes to connectivity, because only half of the American farmers today have adequate internet access, and the connectivity options are even more scarce as you get to developing countries. And if we don't address this disparity in connectivity, we run the risk of putting majority of them, and also all of us, at a significant disadvantage. It's an issue that governments are already beginning to address, but we definitely have a lot more work to do here.
So Melissa, moving to that macro scale, in your mind, what does it take to close the digital tech gap, and can we do it?
Yeah, I'm sure we can do it. You can see, like I said, interest, because the gap has been acknowledged by tech, and I think super excited to see folks like Alina move in, because it wasn't obvious at first why and how tech could play a role, but I think it's so much more obvious for all the reasons Ranjeeta has said. My answer again will maybe be a little bit hokey and off kilter, but I think one of the things we first need to do is realign our values around ag and food systems, and then think about the investments and flow of dollars, both public as well as private dollars, around aligned and shared values, and then thinking about where and how tech has a role to play to drive achievement of goals around those values. So a lot of the globalization of systems of food over the last 50 plus years has been really to commodify food and to really deliver potentially profits back to companies versus food. And I think why I went into food, and I'm a foodie at heart, and I love learning about cultures and people and place, this connection of people and places through food, is getting back to the roots of what food represents in that cultural experience. We are all agriculturalists in that we make decisions about food 3 times a day as an individual, right? And the connection back to what we eat, why we eat, and who grew it, I think is so fundamental. And so if we can get back to what is the tech supposed to serve, what is the food system supposed to serve, right? It has to deliver healthy, nutritious food for consumers. It has to deliver a healthy living for the farmers and producers that grow it. And then it needs to be able to sustain the environment so that you can continue producing food. So I feel like I'm so excited to see tech solutions being driven across those goals. And I think the more we can align, public dollars and incentives, there's lots of studies out saying that almost 90% of global support to the ag sector, basically your subsidies, including in the US, are not going towards public good. Are we delivering commodities that are healthy for people? Are we delivering the outcomes for the environment that we want, or the bottom line to producers and supporting them to weather these really challenging times? I think we need to think about that. And I think the financial sector also wants to realign. And then I think you'll see more investment to filling the gaps of what we need to do to get there, including tech.
I'm gonna ask a question, for you, you mentioned regulation and thinking about how those work. Ranjeeta, you had mentioned before to me that some people see regulation as a real barrier to digital transformation of food. And yet you pointed out to me rightly that finance is also a very highly regulated sector, and yet has undergone this digital transformation. So what do you think that it's going to take for us to interact with regulation in this space and make those advances?
I think it's more of financial segment is extremely regulated, and still, we have seen a lot of advances in the financial segment because, it's a need of the time, and people have taken an approach of starting out small and then scaling it, and that's the approach they have taken, where they have the systems that already exist, and not really changing the existing systems, but taking a parallel approach to enhancing. And I think agriculture is for me, agriculture is a space where we really need to start innovating and focus on the pain points of the customers where we can have a biggest impact. Start small and then scale it over time, because that's the only way we are going to be able to really get the technology to address the needs of the farmers. It's nowhere close to where we need to be, but if we don't start now and we don't keep trying things out and helping address some of the needs, we will never get to that point in time which you were referring to, as we asked about whether technology can really fill the gap. To really get to that, it's a journey. And that journey, it's a long journey. It's not easy, and it's not going to be quick, but we still have to continue to move in that direction.
Thank you. So we have just a few minutes left. I've been warned we have about 5 minutes left. And so I would like to close by, just commenting that each of you are so talented and have chosen to focus that talent toward, building and advancing climate resilience and really building the future of food and ensuring that our planet continues to remain fed. So, Alina, I'd like to ask you, what does diversity bring to this sector, and why should the students that are in attendance today and other innovators in this webinar turn their attention to this sector?
Sure. So I'll speak primarily to the computer science students on the call, since that's who I can most relate to. And I'll tell you, when I started, I had ag food tech was nowhere on my radar, right? Moving into it, it has opened up so many interesting questions that really were not being considered and thought about in some of my other research programs. So these complex biological relationships are just so interesting and difficult to model and build AI systems around, that it has really exciting opportunities of how do we work through this. And a very superficial reason is, wow, do I get to go outside a lot more than I used to from sitting behind the computer all the time. But I think, what does diversity bring to this is just this bringing your life experience to these really hard problems and being able to think about it differently and with a group. It just opens up possibilities and ways of solving problems that we just wouldn't do without that diversity.
Melissa, what are your thoughts in terms of what diversity brings to this sector? And if you have any parting thoughts about why people should pursue this as a career.
Oh yeah, let me start with that one. I think the balance of sustainable food systems to feed a future world without destroying the planet or our climate is probably one of the most intractable, cross-cutting, important challenges of our times. And it is so personal and so global at the same time as well, right? And I think the diversity piece is so important. I mean, one, think of the diversity of cuisines we have, and how would you ever want to take uphill or be relegated to kind of one meal for the rest of your life or one staple crop. And so I just think the beauty and glory of all the kinds of foods that we can eat as humans is something we should celebrate and want to maintain to the fullest extent. But I think in our conservation space, the story I'll tell is that, you know, we ourselves as conservationists, and most conservationists don't look like me, you know, woman of color. The conservation space has been, you know, more traditional in the sense of trying to wall off what a protected area or what conservation means. And I think there is a reckoning and an opening up and such an amazing opportunity of celebrating local and indigenous communities and the knowledge they bring on conservation of their landscapes, on the food systems that they have that have always for eons been in balance with nature. I think of the plains, buffalo, and our Native Nation partners in the central grasslands of North America. Imagine the Serengeti of North America, where people lived in harmony with nature and still fed themselves and used buffalo as their ancestors, as a cultural touchstone, but also for food. And so I think we really need to celebrate and elevate and recognize these voices in the food systems they have, but also in their conservation practices and the harmony with nature that they have brought as well. And we have a lot to learn from those values as well as those practices. And I know that's something WWF is really opening ourselves up to across all of the landscapes we work in, is elevating the role of those people in our work and mission.
Thank you, Melissa. Ranjeeta, any thoughts about what diversity brings to the sector and any motivating words for future innovators?
Absolutely. I think diversity for me, I think it is critical to the success of agriculture. It has been critical since the domestication of plants. And sorry for the background noise. And it's also fully responsible for all the technological advancement we have done in the sector. As you know, Alina already pointed out, I think diversity brings new and more advanced modeling concepts, new ways of delivering customer value. Just like Alina pointed out, you're not sitting in front of the computer, you're also looking at what value you're bringing to the end customers, and new perspectives on collaboration that I don't think would be possible without geographical or cultural diversity. AgTech really stands on the leading edge of the agriculture sector, and it is going to become critical for farm operation success in many places around the world. While it's still inaccessible, for other parts, I think over the next few years, diverse candidates and innovators actually stand to make a real lasting impact on the way digital farming is done around the world. Because new approaches such as UAV managed farms, artificial intelligence, and climate smart farming, it's going to fundamentally change farming by year 2030. You know, that's all, you know, that's kind of our Uber goal that we all are marching towards. And I truly think diversity, is going to really create a difference here.
What amazing final words to end on. Ranjeeta Singh, Chief Product Officer at Climate, part of Bayer, thank you. Dr. Alina Zare at the University of Florida, thank you very much. And Melissa Ho and the World Wildlife Fund, thank you very much for this insightful panel and your remarks. I learned a lot and really enjoyed myself. Thanks.
Thank you, Erin.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you to everyone for a wonderful panel. We really appreciate all of your remarks and insights. You really broke down the critical issues around food production in the face of climate change, and we really, truly appreciate your personal stories and the reminder to bring ag tech decisions back to questions around equity and value and inclusion. You really bring great depth to the conversation.